In today's video, I continue my journey through the main questline featured in the Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind. Last time, I returned to the Urshiliku camp and presented Nabani Mesa with the lost prophecies. She became convinced that I was the one to fulfill the role of the Nerevarine and directed me over to Sulmatul for the third trial. He wasn't as convinced, however, and in order to prove my abilities, sent me on a mission to the ruins of Kogorun in order to obtain some tokens. Upon completion, Sulmatul gave me a riddle with regards to the third trial. The deciphered riddle was the location of the Cavern Incarnate, and upon entering inside, I received the Moon and Star Ring from Azura herself. Returning back to the Ashlander camp, Nabani Mesa spoke of the fourth and fifth trials. I must be named both Hortator of the three great houses and Nerevarine of the four Ashlander tribes. I successfully convinced House Lalu to name me their Hortator, as well as the Urshiliku camp their Nerevarine. The story continues from here. I left Uncle Crassius's home and went back out into the city of Vivec. Peering at my journal, I was reminded that the next great house on my list, Redoran, had counselors that could be found in the city of Aldrun. Sparing no time, I took the Siltstrider to Balmora and then to my desired town. According to my notes, the council meets under the shell of a giant emperor crab. I assumed that this was the manor district of the city and made my way over. It was certainly very interesting inside of here. There were two levels to the shell, the top one seemingly containing residences and the bottom containing storefronts. Along the way, I got stopped by a guard who needed me to pay a small fine. I asked about House Redoran and they told me to speak with someone named Naminda if I wanted to join. From there, I located the Redoran Council Hall and entered inside. Finding Naminda, I approached her and she introduced herself to me. I asked about the Redoran counselors and she handed me the Red Book of Great House Redoran, similar to the Yellow Book I received for House Halalu. Exiting the conversation and taking a look at the book, I was pretty delighted to see that all of the counselors could be found within Aldrun, no less the Manor District, all barring one. I quickly poked my head in to see the rest of the Redoran Council Hall and was pretty blown away by how big the place was. There was a giant open room containing many doors and entrances into smaller zones and rooms. It was really neat to see, especially considering all of this takes place in the shell of a big crab. Assessing the book, I decided to start with the very first counselor on the list, Archmaster Bolvin Venom. I located the Venom Manor and entered inside. The layout, design, and structure was simply stunning. The manor was outfitted with rooms, nooks, and zones. I didn't really know my way around, so I was just following my gut feeling and went into the private quarters. Ascending up some steps and wandering into a den, I laid eyes on Bolvin Venom. Approaching him, he was direct and said that if what I had to say was not important, I should just leave. I asked about the Redoran Hortator, and similar to the whole House Lalu mission, I was prompted to say my piece or to ask how the position is selected. I chose the former, and Venom threw it right back in my face. He insulted me, calling me many names, and cited that a monkey would be better for the job. He finished off by saying that so long as he's the head of this house, I will never be named Hortator. Nabani Mesa did mention that House Redoran has strong ties to the temple, so it's unlikely that many of them would be open to the Nerevarine prophecies. Regardless, I needed Venom's vote in the end, so I wasn't too sure how this one would play out. I left Venom Manor and decided to pay a visit to the Erebar one next. This one was built similar to that of Venom's, and in the exact same fashion, I found myself wandering around and exploring the place until I found my person of interest. Minor Erebar was the next counselor that I needed to convince, and speaking with him, his demeanor was similar to that of Bolvin Venom's. He told me that since he's a busy counselor, I should speak quickly and get straight to the point with what I came here for. I inquire about the Redoran Hortator and tell him about my story and that I seek the title. He responds by summarizing my journey and, similar to Bolvin, insults and patronizes me. It's clear that my work here is going to be a little more strenuous than that of House Halalu, but there are some silver linings, mainly that I don't have to travel too far to get to the other counselors. I left the Erebar Manor feeling a bit defeated. My luck begins to turn around though for the next counselor. I entered inside of the Serethi Manor and immediately came face to face with Athen Serethi. He politely introduces himself, which is a welcome change, and I inquire about the Redoran Hortator. I tell him my story, and Serethi says that he actually believes me. He remarks that he may be able to persuade the other counselors too, but first needs a favor. He asks if I can rescue his son from Venom Manor. I inquire further about Varver Serethi, and Athen tells me that he's being held in the right wing of Bolvin's home. I have to be careful not to kill Bolvin though, or the other counselors will turn against me. Finally, I'm able to leave a counselor's manor with some sort of task to do. I return back to Venom Manor and enter inside of the right wing section. There are a few guards patrolling around, as well as multiple levels to look around in. I scour the place from top to bottom, but don't see any sign of a captive dark elf. I even spoke with some of the personal guards, asking about Varver Serethi, but they would just respond by saying that it was none of my business. Eventually, I did find a strange note with a key on top of it. The note was to someone named Masa Yules, and it read, "Malsa, keep our special guest in the room behind the tapestry. Make sure the door is locked and that he is under guard at all times. If he escapes, I will blame you. Signed V." Just behind where I found the note was a little nook that led to a dead end, but it also contained a tapestry. Beyond the tapestry was a locked door, which for some reason I decided to use an unlocking spell on instead of the key that was with the note. I'm unsure why, to be honest. Doing so, I attracted the attention of the guards and made a quick break inside of the hidden room. Within it, I found Varver and spoke with him. He asked if his father had sent for him and if we should travel together back to Serethi Manor. I told him to follow me and that I would lead the way out. Upon seeing me though, the guards aggroed on and began attacking. They were pretty strong and had the superior numbers. More importantly though, they would only attack me and left Varver alone, so I decided the best course of action was to hightail it and run. The two of us fled back out into the Manor District and we weren't followed any further. From there, I safely escorted Varver back to the Serethi Manor, and upon Athen seeing his son, received a journal update. Speaking once more with Athen, he opened by saying that he's in my debt with the safe return of Varver. I ask again about the Redoran Hortator, and he instantly agrees to give me the title. He mentions that his influence will go a long way with the other counselors, all except one, Bolvin Venom. He says though that if I get the support from all the other ones, I will be granted access to the full title. Leaving Serethi Manor, I made my next stop at Ramarin Manor. I took a quick rest in one of the isolated bedrooms to replenish my bars, and then made my way into the private quarters section. Here, I spotted the Myr I needed to speak with, Halaran Ramaran. He introduced himself and asked who I was. Skipping the formalities, I went straight to the Redoran Hortator topic, and to my delight, Halaran didn't need any persuading. He said he trusts the judgment of Athen and that I have his vote for Hortator. The next residence I went to was the Lethri Manor. I stumbled my way around into the private quarters section, which is where I found the next counselor, Garissa Lethri. He opened by saying that he was a busy man and that what I had to say better have been important. Again, I asked directly about the Redoran Hortator, and Garissa tells me that I have his vote. He likes what he heard from Athen, and although he thinks my story is a little far-fetched, he knows that Dagoth and the 6th house must be dealt with. I left Lethri Manor and returned to the Erebar Manor. Speaking again with my old friend Minor, he opens up with the same sort of impatient dialogue, claiming that he doesn't have time for my childish questions. I inquire about the Redoran Hortator again, and this time, Minor has a completely different response. He says that he's spoken with Athen at length. He apologizes for how he acted before, and for calling me an Imperial spy. He says that I should tell all the other counselors that I have his vote as Hortator. Referencing the Red Book, I only had one more counselor to convince before challenging Bolvin Venom to a duel. Lady Brara Morvain apparently has a manor on the eastern side of Aldrun. Thinking that she could be found there, I left the Manor District, located her house on the map, and made my way over to the residence. Inside, the home was quite dark and tense. I heard the sounds of enemies coming from somewhere. One of the doors in the house was secured by a level 70 lock. The key was located on a nearby shelf, and upon opening it and looking down the stairs, I spotted numerous corpus stalkers and lame corporus. This was my first time fighting the latter, and I didn't realize they had such strong health regen abilities. It only took 2 casts of fire magic to kill them though, and eventually through the use of destruction spells and my halberd, I had cleared the basement area. At the bottom of the stairs, I found the corpse of Remus Morvain, which I assumed to be the husband of Brara Morvain. There were multiple 6th house symbols and markings plastered around the area. The only item here that I thought had any significance was a Morvain ash statue. I'm not really sure what it means or how it was made, but I took it into my inventory. Regardless though, Brara was nowhere to be found. I returned to the Manor District and spoke again with Athen Serethi. He tells me that she's taken up residence in the Redoran Council Hall. I made my way back over to the hub and began looking around. The confusing part is that there are rooms on top of other rooms, meaning that some don't show up on the local map. I spent a good long while scoping out each little section until finally I found a zone called the Morvain Quarters. Within it, I spotted Brara and spoke with her.
This better be important.
I got straight to the point and asked her about the Redoran Hortator. She says she trusts me as Athen has put in a good word. She's a little troubled by the rumors that I'm an Imperial spy, but looks past them and gives me her vote as Hortator. All that's left now is to return back to Bolvin Venom and hope that he accepts my offer to duel. I went back to the Venom Manor and was quite relieved that the personal guards weren't trying to attack me anymore. I shot straight to Bolvin and began speaking with him. He remarked at how I managed to gain the vote of all the other counselors. I asked about becoming the Redoran Hortator. Bolvin responded by saying that although I manipulated everybody else, my mind games won't work on him. He tells me to meet him at the arena in Vivec, so that way we can settle this with a duel to the death. Exiting the conversation and trying to speak with him again, all he says is to go to the arena canton for a fight. So that's exactly what I did. I left the town of Aldrun and took a Silt Strider to the city of Vivec. Just before doing so though, I crafted a new destruction spell which I was pretty excited to use. In Vivec, I took a gondola to the arena district and fought against a sleeper in the Wasteworks. Someone had told me that I benefit from not killing them, but there's something oddly fun to me about egging them on and instigating them into attacking. After that incident, something pretty interesting happened. I wasn't sure where to meet with Bolvin, so I assumed it would be at the top of the arena canton. I entered inside and it placed me at the top of the arena pit. Just below me was Bolvin, who aggroed onto me and tried to attack. Bolvin doesn't have any ranged attacks, and for some reason, the fight is still considered valid even though I wasn't physically in the pit. So, I was able to just stand on the railing and fire off some ranged attacks at him. To his credit though, he was fairly agile and moved around a lot, so actually landing the hits wasn't very easy. From there, I dropped down into the pit and kited him around, alternating between stabbing him with my halberd and casting my new poison spell. He fought with a two-handed blade, which had pretty good reach, but luckily for me, my halberd was slightly longer, so I had the upper hand. Finally, I was able to deliver the killing blow, and Bolvin was defeated. Athen told me that it was acceptable to loot fallen foes after a duel, and I'm glad I did, because he had some really expensive gear. He practically had a complete ebony armor set, which fetches close to around 100,000 gold. He also had a Daedric Dai Katana, which alone had a value of 120,000 gold. From here, I left the arena pit and the city of Vivec, making my way back to Aldrun. With Bolvin dead, there was nothing standing in my way for becoming Redoran Hortator. I returned back to Serethi Manor and spoke with Athen. I asked him about the title, and he responded by saying that all of the counselors were in agreement. He officially named me Hortator of House Redoran and wished me success in persuading the rest of the province. He handed me the Ring of the Hortator, which was the token of my office and a symbol of my status. Athen then says that he has a sealed package for me. He isn't sure what its contents are, but it comes from the highest ranks of the temple. He assumes that it has to do with my Nerevarine claim. He also says that there was a public notice put out which claims that I'm an Imperial agent. Athen hands me all of the documents as well as the ring. Looking at my inventory, I first checked out the Ring of the Hortator. It has the enchantment of Fortify Health for 8 to 15 points for 30 seconds. Then, I looked at the Belt of the Hortator, given to me by House Halalu. It has a constant effect of Fortify Magicka for 20 points, which will certainly come in handy. Then, I looked at the public notice put out about me. It reads, "Well-beloved people of Morrowind, take heed, take warning. The outlaw named Bard, stated trade of mage, lately called Incarnate and Nervarine, now is shown to the investigating ordinators and magistrates of this district to be an agent in the pay of the Imperial Intelligence Service. This outlaw's claims are false. The prophecies this outlaw cites are discredited. The dishonest character and base purpose of the outlaw in perpetrating this hoax are now made clear to all observers. Bard is sought for various crimes by ordinators and town guards. Report all encounters with this outlaw to the proper authorities. If you see this outlaw in public, give the alarm. Published by the authority of the Temple, the Order of the Watch, Magistrates of Vardenfell District, under the signature and authority of Grand Master Barosala, Captain of the Watch, hear and heed." Then I looked into the note given to me by the Arcanon. It's quite lengthy and reads, "To the Outlander lately proclaiming his identity as the Nervarine, to be delivered with haste." The assertions made being in direct contradiction of the doctrine of the Tribunal, namely that you are the Nervarine, the reincarnation of the sainted Lord Nerevar, are, in addition to being against temple teaching, incredible and implausible in the extreme. The revelations made by the Inquisition, namely, that you yourself are in fact an agent of the Imperial Intelligence Service, otherwise known as the Order of the Blades, lately made with substantial evidence by the Lord High Archordinator, Barosala, further calls into question the validity of and motivations behind your claims. However, as incredible as your claims are, as much as they are in direct contradiction of the teachings of the Temple, and tainted as they are by the interferences to be made upon your close association with the covert policies and interests of the Emperor, the interests of the Temple and its leadership, and in particular, the interests of his immortal lordship, Vivek, are best served by a close and personal examinations of the claims being made and close and personal examinations of the motivations and character of the claimant. The Temple, through its examinations of its records, in particular, the records of the Hieroglypha and Apocrypha, is intimately familiar with the many and varied claims of signs and feats that would mark the Nervarine according to prophecy. Therefore, in the event of the fulfillment of certain of those most remarkable and scarcely credible claims, namely that the claimant should, at one time, be the acknowledged holder of several ancient titles of power and authority of the Dunmer people, to wit, Hortator of the Great Houses and Nervarine of the Ashlander tribes, the Temple proposes that the claimant of the identity of the Nervarine shall present himself for inspection before his Reverend Honor, Arcanon Lord Thoril Suryani, High Arcanon and Chancellor of Vivek, Arcanon of the Canonry of Vardenfell, Archpriest of the High Fane, for review and consideration of his claims and identity. However, until such time as the claimant actually has been named Hortator separately and jointly by the three great houses of Vardenfell, and at the same time has been named Nervarine separately and jointly by the four tribes of the Ashlanders, there is no purpose in reviewing or discussing these claims. Because of the Temple's official position on the prophecies of the Nervarine, and in the interests of preserving the security of the claimant from those parties who might wish to do him harm, it is convenient that the claimant of the title, Nervarine, shall present himself in secret to Arcanon Suryani in the Arcanon's private quarters in the High Fane of Vivek. To signify agreement with these terms and conditions for a meeting with the Arcanon, the Nervarine claimant may present himself to the healer of the High Fane of Vivek, Danso Indulis, and the necessary arrangements will be made. Once again, no purpose is served by meeting until the claimant is named Hortator of the three great houses and is named Nervarine of the four Ashlander tribes. Written at the request of and in the name of his Reverend Honor, Thoril Suryani, Arcanon and Chancellor of Vivek, Delano Lauren, Priest of Vivek, Assistant to the Arcanon. So apparently, the Temple feels threatened by my presence and has put out a warning to the citizens. But, on the other hand, should I complete my task in fulfilling the 4th and 5th Nervarine trials, they would seek an audience with me. It's a little confusing, but regardless, with that, thus ends the quest, Redoran Hortator. Before seeking out the last great house Telvanni, I traveled back to the town of Balmora. In between the hunt for Hortator status, I embarked on a few side quests and went adventuring. Most importantly, I worked on receiving buffs and multipliers for my intelligence attribute, as that's what dictates my maximum amount of magicka. I jumped from level 11 to level 13, and then continued on with the main quest. I remembered that Nabani Mesa had said that the Telvanni counselors reside in the region of Sadrith Mora, so I teleported from the Balmora Mages Guild to the Wolverine Hall on the east coast and wandered into the main town area. I looked for one of the unique natural Telvanni towers and laid eyes on Tel Naga. Entering inside of its great hall, I spoke with a few NPCs in an attempt to acquire the Counselor book, but was ultimately unsuccessful. I made my way through the general quarters, continuing to ask around, and eventually landed in the upper tower section. Here, I spoke with a man named Endar Drenim. He introduced himself and asked if he could help in any way. I was delighted to see that he had the Telvanni Counselor's dialogue prompt. Asking him about it, he handed me the Brown Book of Great House Telvanni, also marking several important towers on my map. Reading the Brown Book, I learned that one of the counselors, Naloth, was present within this tower. Assuming him to be all the way at the top, I levitated my way up and spotted the Myrrh. Speaking with him, he immediately came across as rude, saying that whatever I wanted, the answer was no. I asked about the Telvanni Hortator, and Naloth began to lash out. He told me to shut up, that it was superstitious nonsense, and that I shouldn't have interrupted him with such foolishness. Exiting the conversation, I assumed that this was going to be similar to my endeavors with House Redoran. Addressing the Brown Book, I figured it best to not approach Archmagister Gothrin at the beginning. So instead, I decided to seek out Master Arian. Arian was located in Tel Voss, so I took a boat from Sadrith Mora to Tel Mora and then over to Voss. Tel Voss was located slightly west and inland of my current location. Making my way there and laying eyes on it, it was definitely a unique settlement. It appeared to be a stronghold of sorts with a Telvanni wizard tower located in the middle. Tel Voss was actually quite confusing for me to navigate through. The towers all intertwined and twisted, some of them having enemies and others having grand and interesting discoveries. It seemed like there was a lot to do in here in terms of little side quests, mysteries, and exploration. I stayed the course though and began to ask around for Master Arian. An Argonian by the name of Smokeskin Killer told me that I must levitate to the top of the tower and find a door facing south. Doing so, I found myself at the entrance of Arian's chambers and entered on inside. Ascending up some stairs and making my way into the next room over, I ran into the counselor himself. He opened up the conversation by stating that he knew I wished to become the Telvanni Hortator. I inquired about it and was prompted to tell him my story. Doing so, he hears me out and in the end, comes to the judgment that I will take my responsibilities seriously. He gives me his vote and also some information on the other counselors. Naloth, whom I previously spoke with, is apparently ill-tempered, but with enough persuasion, he may listen to reason. Mistress Drotha apparently doesn't like men. There's no specific reason for this though. She may be pretty hard to convince, especially given the fact that I'm playing as a male character. Mistress Thorana is slowly losing her mind and has become quite eccentric over the last few years. And finally, Archmagister Gothrin will never come to a decision. In fact, Arian says that he will delay his vote indefinitely, and my best course of action would be to kill Gothrin. He's transparent though in that upon Gothrin's death, he stands to gain the most. Leaving the Wizard Tower and ultimately Tel Voss, I traveled to Tel Mora, which was the next closest Wizard Tower. Tel Mora contains Counselor Drotha, which might have been the interaction I looked forward to the most. Admittedly, it took me a very long time to find my way into the upper tower section of Tel Mora. I ended up levitating all the way up the exterior, but only after a couple of minutes of looking around in the lower tower section. I ascended all the way up the upper tower and soon came across Mistress Drotha.
Make it quick, Outlander.
Speaking with her, she immediately opened up with asking what a man was doing here and asked if I was lost. I inquired about the Telvanni Hortator, and she kept reiterating that I must have been lost. Lost in every capacity. Body and soul, and lost in the darkness that surpasses understanding, whatever that means. The conversation ends with her calling me a manling. A small spoiler here, but this quest single-handedly ended up running my gold reserves empty. I started off by bribing Drotha with approximately 600 drakes, until her disposition was at around 80. I then asked about the Telvanni Hortator once more and was prompted with 3 different options. One was to leave before something terrible happens. Another was to strike a manly pose and wink invitingly. The third was to hurl myself at her feet and plead for a hearing. I chose the very last one, and she called me pathetic, but ultimately granted me the option of continuing with my story. I did so, and it managed to get through to Mistress Drotha. She said that she was glad she heard me out and that I persisted with her. She gives me her vote as Hortator and also bestows a scroll of Summon Golden Saint upon me. Leaving Tel Mora, I paid passage via boat back to Sadrith Mora to seek out Naloth at Tel Naga.
I will listen. Leave me, but make it quick.
I once again approached the Mur and asked about the Hortator title. He responded in the exact same manner as before, calling it superstitious nonsense. I then bribed Naloth with approximately 400 gold pieces, bringing his disposition up to around the 80-point mark. Inquiring again about the Telvanni Hortator, he responded with a flurry of questions, asking if I was qualified for the job, if I wanted it, if it was necessary, etc. In the end, he admitted that he didn't really care either way and gave me his vote. With 3 counselors convinced, I only needed to seek audience with 2 more. My next journey was out to the town of Tel Brenora. I was able to buy a boat ride there from Sadrith Mora and soon quickly spotted the Wizard Tower. I ascended to the upper tower section and entered on inside. The Tel Brenora Tower might have been my favorite one to visit. Everything was disorderly, disorganized, and randomly placed. Going into Thorana's chambers and looking around, I came across the room in which she resided. Books were thrown about and burning in the back of the room, and jewels were strung about on the floor. I approached Thorana and spoke with her. She greeted me by asking if I was here to feed the spiders. I ignored that and asked about the Telvanni Hortator. She responded in quite a strange manner. She went on about steel boxes, bitter green roots, and netch blood, ultimately confusing Hortator with Hormador. She seemed quite obsessed with spider eggs, rambling on about them and asking if I had any. I'm prompted to tell her my story or politely listen to her. I chose the former and she still seemed confused on the subject. She called life here boring, spoke more about spiders, and in the end, fell asleep mid-sentence. I restarted the conversation and this time chose to politely listen. She rambles on about more nonsense and spider-related topics, in the end asking if I was still listening. I continue to idly hear her out, and this time, the game tells me Mistress Thorana shows no sign of stopping her ramblings. Listening further, the game then says that since Thorana is sustained by the necromantic arts, she could likely go on forever. This is where I then decided to raise Thorana's disposition to above 80, by bribing her with about 400 pieces of gold. Asking one more time about the Telvanni Hortator and telling her my story right away, she comes to her senses and realizes what I'm speaking about. Thorana luckily grants me her vote. All that's left now is to speak with Archmagister Gothrin, although I already know what to expect from it. Referencing the Brown Book, Gothrin can be found in Tel Aran. I traveled to Sadrith Mora via boat and from there did some island hopping and landed in town. I went to the Wizard Tower and levitated all the way up to the upper tower level. Inside, I located the Archmagister himself, who kept the company of 2 Dremora. Speaking with Gothrin, he asked what I wanted and I inquired about the Telvanni Hortator. I told him my story and asked for his vote, and exactly as Arian said, Gothrin was indecisive. He said that my story made sense and that I was persuasive enough, but the decision shouldn't be made in haste. He apparently needs time to think and asks me to leave. According to the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, after bribing him and raising his disposition, his answer will come to a no. So it really does seem like the only way through is to kill him. I had an incredibly difficult time accomplishing this though. Not only was Gothrin himself extremely powerful, the Dremora by his side were tough fighters, and there were 2 other NPCs in this tower that would also come to his aid. It was obvious that I needed to take care of Gothrin quickly, otherwise he would just heal himself and all my efforts would have been for nothing. I must have spent a combined total of about an hour figuring out how to defeat him and failing in my attempts. I bought scrolls, created new spells, and tried different positions to set myself up in. In the end, my tactic for killing the Telvanni Archmagister involved casting a frost spell that dealt 100 points of damage for a duration of 3 seconds. Following this was a scroll of Elemental Burst Frost Edition. Once Gothrin was dead, I fled the building, saved my game, and went back inside to loot his body. He had a Daedric dagger, which was worth quite a lot of gold. He also had some potions on him and a scroll of Hellfire. Leaving the tower once and for all, I could finally return to Tel Voss and be named Hordator of House Telvanni. Speaking again with Arian, he asked if I had gathered the votes of the other councillors. I inquired further, and he said that with everyone's endorsement, I can now be given the title. Arian hands me the robe of the Hordator and wishes me luck on the rest of my journey. The robe itself is quite flashy and aesthetic, but most importantly, it fortifies magicka for 20 points for 30 seconds. With this token in hand, I had officially become Hordator of all 3 great houses, therefore fulfilling the 4th trial of the Nerevarine, thus ending the quest, Telvanni Hordator. Exiting Tel Voss, it was time to return back to Nabani Mesa at the Urshilaku camp. It wasn't too far from my current location, so I decided to leap my way west instead of traveling around the nearby towns for a closer starting point. Arriving, I went inside of the Wise Woman's yurt and spoke with the Oracle Seer. I asked the Mesa about the 3 other Ashland tribes. The Ahamusa tribe of the Grazelands are peaceful, and Sinamu Mirpal, their Wise Woman, is also their Ashkan. The Zeneb tribe of the Grazelands have a chief named Koshad, a strong and popular man. Mesa tells me that I will likely need to earn his favor before he grants me any titles. Then finally, she tells me about the Arabinamsum tribe of Molag Mar. They're apparently a war-seeking violent tribe, but their wise woman, Manare, would be the best one to speak with. I quickly take a look at my map to see where all of the camps are located. They all happen to be on the eastern side of the island, and each not too far away from the other. I decided to set my sights on the Arabinamsum tribe first, as they were close to Sadrith Mora. Before leaving, I tested out the Mark and Recall spells, which were pretty nifty. I began by making my way to the town of Margon and taking a Siltstrider to Aldrun. From Aldrun, I went to Balmora and then teleported via Mage's Guild to the Wolverine Hall. From the Wolverine Hall, I leapt all the way to the Ashlander camp. It resembled the Urshilaku camp in many ways, as it too was in a barren and desolate region of the island. The first NPC I spoke with was a woman named Camus. She said that I won't find any welcome here, unfortunately. I asked about the Nerevarine, and Camus said that the Ashkan and Gulakans say the prophecies are foolish superstitions, but the wise woman, Manare, knows better. Exiting the conversation, I found the wise woman's yurt and entered inside. Speaking with her, she introduced herself and asked if I needed counsel or services. I inquired about the Nerevarine prophecies, and Manare spoke plain. She said that while the current Ashkan, Ulathpal, and his Gulakans live, I'll never be named the Arabinamson Nerevarine. Manare says that I must kill Ulathpal and his supporters, then make the Gulakan, Han Amu, the son of the former Ashkan, the new Ashkan. Exiting Manare's yurt, I went to the group of tents at the edge of the site and entered inside of the Ashkan's yurt. Here, there were 2 Dunmer present, one named Ahaz and the other was Ulathpal. Speaking with Paul, he asked what I wanted. I inquired about the prophecies, and he said that there's an easy solution to this problem. The conversation ends, and without warning, both Ahaz and Ulathpal begin attacking me. I instantly killed Ulath with my 100-point frost spell, and then exited the yurt to replenish my bars. I returned and defeated Ahaz using lesser frost magic. Looting Ulath's body, he had a pretty powerful war axe on him, and the same thing with Ahaz and his belongings. The next yurt I went into was owned by someone named Ranabi. I went up to him, and he said that because I've slain one of his people, I must pay with my life. A fight breaks out and he conjures a skeleton to aid him. I defeat him with more frost magic and look inside of his inventory. He has a plethora of enchanted items, all of which I take for myself. The next yurt I go into belongs to someone named Ashuahi, supposedly the best warrior in the tribe according to Manare. He says the exact same dialogue piece that Renabi had opened with, and then begins attacking me. He actually doesn't hit that hard, but does take quite a few casts of frost spells to defeat. Upon his death, I loot his enchanted cuirass, and that pretty much takes care of the Ashkan and Gulakans. The last 2 yurts belong to someone named Masarapal and then Han Amu, but neither of them are aggressive towards me. I spoke with Han Amu and he said that he didn't care about being a Gulakan. I inquired about the title and he said that he's not good at fighting and that no one likes him. He just wants to be left alone. I returned back to Manare to see what I need to do in order to convince him into becoming the new Ashkan. She doesn't give me specific answers, but does mention that he would need some persuasion. Returning back to Hanamu, he says that no matter what, he doesn't want to be made chief. He goes on to say that everyone despises him, that he's weak, foolish, and a coward. I inquire about the Ashkan title and bring up the robe of Ererdan. He recognizes the robe and the legacy that comes with it. I have the options of showing him the robe and making a speech, or outright giving it to him. I choose the latter and Han receives a small confidence boost. I continue and bring up Sanet Keel's fire amulet, choosing to hand it over to him as well. Han gains even more confidence in himself, but not enough to take on the role of Ashkan. Finally, I bring up the topic of the axe of Aranamu, Han's father's weapon. I hand that over to him and that's just enough for him to believe in himself. After each item is handed over, he slowly begins to understand how strength, courage, and responsibility play into the chief's role. He feels as though he's now ready to fulfill that title, and most importantly, he grants me the title of Arabinimson Neravarine. Han Amu tells me that I should return back to Wise Woman Manare for the token that represents my status among this tribe. Doing so, Manare congratulates and thanks me for all that I've done here, as well as my new title. She hands me an artifact called the Seizing of the Arabinimson. The item is a belt, and it has the enchantment of telekinesis for 50 feet for 30 seconds on self. With that, thus ends the quest, Arabinimson Neravarine. From the Arabinimson camp, I decided to travel to the Zeneb camp as it was the next closest one. This camp was southwest of Voss, while the Ahamusa tribe was north of it. It didn't take me long to leap all the way there, although it did take me a little longer than I originally thought. As per usual, I was stopped along the way by enemies, and this time round for traveling, I was able to cast Go Places 3 times consecutively, with an updated Slowfall cast after the first leap. The issue though is that I would get aggroed onto by an enemy on the second or third jump, which would prohibit me from resting and regenerating my bars. This left me either waiting a very long time for the enemy to show up, or reverting to my last autosave and repeating the jumps over again. Eventually, I made it to the Grazelands region, which to be honest, I really liked the look of. It reminded me of a cleaner and less grey version of the West Gash region. Then, after a few more leaps, I found myself at the Zeneb camp. Right away, I located the Wise Woman's yurt and entered on inside. I met with Sonumu Zabamat and spoke with her. She welcomed me and asked if I needed services or counsel. I asked for counsel and she said that this tribe's Ashkan, Koshad, has been expecting me. Inquiring about the Neravarine prophecies, Sonumu tests me and asks if it's true that an Outlander can become the Neravarine. I can either decline to comment or tell her my story and show my proofs. Choosing the latter, she takes interest in my tales and particularly that of the Moon and Star Ring. She reiterates that I should meet with the Ashkan at once. Exiting the yurt, I located Koshad's tent and entered inside of it. Speaking with the chief, he welcomes me into their home and questions the Neravarine prophecies as well as how an Outlander can become the Neravarine. Inquiring about the Neravarine, he just can't quite comprehend that a non-native to the province of Morrowind is destined to be its savior, and unfortunately, he refuses to talk any more about it. Exiting his yurt and returning back to Sanumu's, I spoke with her again to see where I could go from here. She acknowledges that Koshad can be a hard-headed man, but shares a little secret with me. Apparently, the chief loves expensive Outlander clothing, and Sonumu says that if I bring him a pair of exquisite shoes, he might be a little more open with me. At this point, I did have to use some external references in order to see where I could find the pair of loafers. I had some in my inventory only recently, but unfortunately sold them to one of the merchants. I did locate a pair in the town of Aldrun for sale, so I made that my destination. I cast Mark at the Zeneb camp for quick access back. From here, I leapt all the way to Sadrith Mora and took a boat to Ebonheart. From Ebonheart, I went to Vivec, and from there, I took a Silt Strider to Balmora, and then from Balmora to Aldrun. It's interesting because I don't actually know if this was the most efficient way to get to Aldrun or not. I know these Silt Strider and boat paths to get there from certain cities, but from others, I'm fairly clueless. Regardless, I made it there and paid a visit to the clothiers in the Manor District. I managed to buy a singular pair off of Bevail Tenerin, and then cast Recall to get back to camp right away. I really do have to give it up for Mark and Recall. They're incredibly useful spells. Entering back inside of the Ashcan's yurt and speaking with him, I'm prompted to hand over the exquisite shoes as a courtesy gift. Doing so, he's very thankful towards me. I ask again about the Nerevarine and tell him my story / show him my proofs. In the end, I ask him to be named Nerevarine of the tribe, but there's still some resistance from Koshad. He thinks my story is a bit outlandish and doesn't deem me fit to lead the tribes in times of war. I'm then prompted to either ask him for a task to prove my worth, or to persuade him that I'm the one for the job. I try to convince him, but he shoots me down, citing that I talk too much. Trying again, this time I ask to be given a task. He comes up with one right away. A vampire named Calvario has apparently taken refuge in a nearby dungeon called Nerano Ancestral Tomb. Koshad says that should I kill Calvario, him and I could speak more. I ask further about the vampire, and he tells me that Calvario is young but dangerous. He most likely was driven out of his previous lair by older and more powerful vampires. Koshad suggests that I go get supplies for the fight, as I might be needing them. I ask further questions about vampires in general, and Koshad tells me what I already know from the other Elder Scrolls games. He does confirm my suspicions though, in that due to my Nerevarine status, I shouldn't be able to contract the disease. Finally, I ask about the tomb and he marks it on my map, giving me specific instructions on how to get there. I was pretty excited to face my first vampire in this game. I don't know if ash vampires and mundane vampires are the same thing, but something tells me no. Regardless, I know the feeling of danger and respect that I have for them in Oblivion. I also heard that there are vampire quests in this game, so I'm really looking forward to doing those one day as well. I figured that I'd be fighting undead of some variety in this tomb, so I came prepared with my dwarven spear just in case. Entering inside of the dungeon, the first enemy I fought against was a Greater Bonewalker. I have some PTSD when it comes to fighting these guys, but this time I made sure to have some restore strength potions on hand. The next enemies I fought were a pair of skeletons, but my magic mixed with the dwarven spear proved to be too powerful for them. There were actually more than a few recently deceased bodies in this tomb. One of them had a key for the Andaran tomb on them. In fact, there was a note in here from someone named Bacharach that almost paints the whole picture. It's addressed to someone named Morris, one of the dead in here. Apparently, the group of them were in some sort of raiding criminal organization. A snitch in their group told a powerful necromancer named Goris about their whereabouts. Goris has been sending undead to all of their outposts, and Bacharach warns Morris to get out while they can. One of the dead in here was named Ursine, and she was meant to be the messenger as well as the bearer of the key to their next rendezvous point. It seems that the group never made it out though. I wonder if this has to do solely with Goris, or if Calvario had anything to do with it as well. Regardless, the world building and puzzle pieces here are just fantastic. It's finally time to face the vampire. I lined up outside of the final door and interacted with it. It was booby-trapped and I became poisoned. Before facing Calvario, I tried to wait out the effect, but it didn't seem to end. I popped health potions to regen, but the curse was still going. At this point, I decided to just charge on in and fight Calvario as is, hoping that I could kill him before the poison takes full effect. I opened the door and on the other side of it was a spirit along with the vampire. I took care of the ghost quickly, and then it was a 1v1 with Calvario. The game did a great job at giving him a horrifying face, similar to what we see in Oblivion. I was lucky in that at some point in the battle, the poison effect ended up wearing off, so I decided to quickly leave the tomb and rest until fully healed before going back in. My strategy was to overwhelm him with fire magic, and it worked pretty well. He kept casting an absorb health spell that set me back a bit, but it wasn't much of a match in the end. Calvaria was slain and I had fulfilled my task to the Ashcan. I looted the rest of the tomb and then cast recall to get back to the Zeneb tribe. Here, I spoke again with Koshad and informed him of the vampire's demise. He says that he might have been mistaken in his original judgment, and that maybe I am the Nerevarine. I inquire further about the title, and Koshad delays the process even further by asking for one final gift, a Telvanni bride that can provide him with many children. He finishes off by saying that Sonumu Zubamat, the wise woman, will know exactly what he's looking for. I leave the yurt and return back to Sonumu's. She realizes how ridiculous his request is, but has a plan to satisfy his needs. She suggests that I go to Tel Aran and meet with the slave mistress, Seville Imain. Imain will likely have someone that I could purchase an outfit to act as a Telvanni lady. She assures me that Ashcan Koshad won't know the difference. Leaving the camp, I made my way to Tel Aran and immediately found Seville in the festival slave market. I spoke with her and she asked if I was looking for a standard slave or something in particular. I inquired about the latter and she acknowledged how cunning the plan set up by Sonomu was. She then went on to say that Falura Lurvu would be just the slave I was looking for. However, I would need to buy her an exquisite shirt, shoes, and skirt. Seville directed me to Telmora to meet with Elegnin the clothier, as she will likely have all of those items in stock. I made my way to the docks and traveled by boat to the town. Here, I purchased all of the necessary items and then went back to Seville. Seville said that I could give them to Falura when I fully bought her. But in the meantime, she needs more time to learn how to play the part of a highborn Telvanni woman. She asks me to buy a bottle of Telvanni bug musk perfume from the local apothecary, as it will sell the story even further. I do so, and already the tab for this quest is adding up quite nicely. Finally, the icing on the cake was when I returned back to Seville. She said that I could purchase Falura and complete my quest for 1,200 gold, which is apparently discounted. Thankfully, I had recently sold some big items to the local merchants, or I wouldn't have been able to afford all this. I paid the price and Seville handed me the key to Falura's cage. Opening it, I approached the Dunmer and spoke with her. She was quite skittish at first, but upon asking her about herself, she pulled out the perfect background story and lied amazingly about her nobility. She opened up by saying that she's a little nervous about the arrangement and marrying an Ashlander, but ultimately anything's better than being a slave. I gifted her the clothes and perfume, to which she was ecstatic about. She quickly became excited and looked forward to the adventure ahead of her. She asked me if I was ready to travel with her, and I said yes. This is unfortunately where my means of quick transportation were rendered null and void. I attempted to leap my way back to the Zeneb camp, but no matter how long I waited for, Falura never showed up. Then I was hoping that the recall spell would work on her too, but unfortunately it didn't. This is when I realized I was going to have to walk all the way back to camp. I bought boat passage for us to Voss, and from Voss began walking along the road south. It wasn't a bad trip overall. We encountered some enemies on the road, the worst of which were seemingly bandits. I wasn't sure if Falura could die in battle, but didn't want to risk it. The bandits were laying into her, and I tried to take as much aggro as possible, ultimately resulting in my death at least once. They were stationed outside of a yurt, and there was actually someone hostile inside of it, but I didn't want to get too sidetracked with the little things. Soon though, we cleared the problem area and made it back to camp. Entering inside of the Ashcan's yurt, Falura spoke with me right away and asked if this was her groom-to-be. She liked the way he looked and the fact that he smiled a lot, ultimately deeming that she thinks she's going to have a very happy life with him. Exiting the conversation, I spoke with Koshad and he was thrilled to see I'd brought him a Telvanni bride. She wasn't as wide in the hips as he would have liked, but he promised to make her happy and treat her right. In the end, he grants me the title of Zeneb Nerevarine and hands me the Zeneb Thong, the enchanted heirloom and the token of the Zeneb tribe. Despite its confusing name, the thong is actually an amulet and has the power to detect animals for 150 feet for 5 seconds. With this symbol in hand, all I need is for the last tribe to recognize me as Nerevarine, thus ending the quest, Zeneb Nerevarine.
Wealth beyond measure, Outlander.